welcome back. In this week's episode, I'm joined by Craig Colvett. Craig is a life coach who helps people going through different life transitions, and he's here to talk about how you can be better prepared when transitioning into retirement. We're going to cover what life planning is, how a life coach can help you through this transition, and some steps that you can take if you find yourself going through a life transition to come out better on the other end. So welcome, Craig.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. So before we hit record, we were talking a little bit about life coaching, what that is and kind of how you got into that. Why don't you tell me a little more about that?
Yeah, for sure. So I spent many years in the financial services industry, and I recognized that I had a desire to really help people on a more basic level as human beings. We kind of started the pandemic a little bit. And what kind of got brought to the forefront for me was noticing how there were a lot of people struggling, even people who I would view as fairly successful, but just with sort of the day-to-day challenges. We see it in broad numbers, right, with anxiety levels, with overall medication levels. And so, yeah, it really got brought to the forefront for me. And I recognized that I wanted to be doing more to be part of the solution. And so I found life coaching as a good opportunity to potentially build out my own client roster, to be able to pick within life coaching what specific areas I wanted to work with people on. And so that's what I've been up to for the past 2 years.
Okay, cool. So I hear that a lot, like, life coaching. What does that mean to you? Or how would you define that?
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's an important question, right? So a lot of times when people hear the word coach, they immediately think of like a sports coach. And there certainly are some similarities, right? So I'd say the single biggest thing that a life coach provides is perspective, right? So if you and I were working together, hypothetically, I don't have any of the previous connections to any of the challenges you may face. I don't have the emotional attachments to some of the people or topics or subject matter. And so really, if you think about from a sports coach perspective, all of the greats work with coaches. And it's not because the coaches are any better at life. I like to emphasize that. Just because I'm a life coach doesn't mean I don't have my own challenges. I work with a coach personally. So really, it's about bringing in perspective. It's about putting some framework around what people might be wanting to work through. And a lot of it, Ryan, is really unpacking what people are dealing with. I've heard some statistics that around 95% of our thoughts are subconscious. So really, it's about unpacking those subconscious thoughts and these sort of rote behaviors that we get into. I have 3 young kids, so it's very easy to just get in the daily grind, and things can be a blur, right? And so sometimes you want to make sure that you're being very intentional about how you go about things, living life through your value system that you believe in, and really defining what's important and are you prioritizing it now. So it just allows people an objective partner to have a conversation with. That's really what it is.
Yeah. Is there a specific license or credentials that a life coach typically has?
So there is a certification available similar to your field. There's like the CFP, for example, the Certified Financial Planner. So the governing body for life coaching is the International Coaching Federation. And there are accredited programs. I will also say there are not accredited programs. But yes, you can go through any curriculum that you choose, provided they have the crediting, and then you take a take a test, and then separately you're also there's a practical component too, where you send in a portion of you coaching someone. So there is a certification program available. There are multiple. There are some specialty disciplines, again, similar to your field. And so there are several available depending on what folks are looking to get.
Kind of like we have the alphabet soup of financial credentials, right? There's a lot of them out there.
No shortage.
Yes. Yeah, there's no shortage. So if somebody, is when we started talking about retirement, if somebody's transitioning into retirement and they were looking for some help from a life coaching perspective, what would that look like? What types of things are you helping them with?
So I think the big part that folks tend to under-prepare for, and rightfully so, right? I mean, I say this, unless you're Michael Jordan, most people don't retire twice, right?
Yeah.
So the big transition, there's no shortage of information and resources as it relates to the financial aspects of retiring and building a successful retirement financially. And that's great, right? That's important. Money is absolutely the means for how we go about achieving what's important to us.
Yeah.
But, excuse me, what's also very clear is that the emotional and mental shift is bigger than most people anticipate. Right? So first, sort of acknowledging that it's going to be a huge shift from what you've been used to for 20, 30, 40, 50 years, right? It could be a huge chunk of your life. And so recognizing that this shift will probably be bigger than you expect. And again, you can go to friends, you can go to maybe former colleagues who retired just ahead of you. And a life coach is just another person in that support network that you can engage with. So what specifically can you work on? Really, who are you in retirement? What's your identity? One of the things I notice is if you talk to somebody and you don't know they're retired and you ask what they do, they typically lead with, well, I'm retired. Right?
Sure.
Well, all that really tells the other person is what they don't do. Right? What you just found out is I don't wake up and go to work 8 to 5.
Sure.
Right. And so so sort of a small little challenge that I'll pose to people who are working on this is lead with what you do, who you are, how you spend your days, what your passions are, et cetera. And so really redefining, if you were in XYZ role when you were still working, what role or roles, and it's usually multiple, what roles are you in right now? And so really it's about mapping that out and making sure that your days aren't just these challenges that you aren't up for the task to meet, because they're very unstructured, and that can be a challenge for people who have typically been used to a lot of structure over their careers. Yeah,
interesting. I obviously, that's a common thing. You're retired. What do you do? I'm retired. It's funny you mentioned that. What is somebody is going, none of them retired, right? Like, how do you help them find a purpose? Because if they were at a company for 40 years, right, that was their kind of a large part of their identity.
Yes. Yeah, that's an important word, right? That is exactly how they identified, because one of the first things we ask somebody is, where are you from? What do you do? Right?
Yeah.
So I think that's it. So understanding what are people's passions, right? Do they want to be, I think about, there was a gentleman I ran into at Lowe's that worked there. He was 84 years old and he was helping me load sod into the truck.
Okay.
All right. And I asked him why he was there, because I was very curious. I'm a curious guy, right?
Yeah.
Especially now as a coach. And I'm like, I said, I'm curious. What are you still doing here? And he's like, it gets me out of the house. It keeps me active and it keeps me engaged. And so I think about that component, right? What are hobbies? What are interests? What are passions? Sometimes, people end up, they're in a career, but maybe that passion started to fade towards the end, or they didn't like the organization they were a part of, and they still want to kind of do that, but maybe just more on their own terms. So what kind of schedule do they want? If they did find a job in the loose sense, how many hours a day? How many days a week? What else do they want time for? What else is a priority? So a lot of it is really defining values and goals, and then bringing that back to essentially backfilling it.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, the social aspect, as you can appreciate, the social aspect is the single biggest predictor of happiness for anybody. Not just for retirees,
probably that
for
and health,
anybody.
right?
Yes.
Yeah.
That's exactly correct. And it's very easy to be isolated these days, especially working remotely. And so really recognizing what may have been missing previously. What do you want to make sure we include this time around? What's the role of your spouse? Is your spouse working? What does that look like? Grandkids, travel plans. So really the wheel of goals, and then starting to break them down a bit, right? Where the priority is and what have they been doing a good job of? And maybe which ones they realize, I'm not happy with what I'm achieving here, and I want to fix that.
Sure.
Yeah.
So you mentioned goals. I mean, I teach a retirement planning class, and we start out talking about goals, short and long term. But these are more like, okay, I want to retire in 5 years, or I want to save up enough money to maybe buy a second house, or pay for a wedding or something like that, right? More like financial. Like, what would be like an example of like I guess it would be a life planning goal, do you call it, or?
Yeah, so I would actually take the exact same goals that you just listed, and I would ask them to explain the importance and what each of those mean to them. So typically, if somebody, let's stick with the second home, right? Or travel's another big one, right?
Sure, yeah.
So, and they're common. Sometimes I think people regurgitate them because they think they should. That does happen, right? But really, I want them to unpack it. And there's no right or wrong answer. I just want them to explain to themselves ultimately. They don't have to explain anything to me. I want them to explain why having a second home is important. What's it going to do for them? What's the travel going to do for them, right? Because that's why we want these goals. We have the expectation they will do something for us. I just want to make sure that it's not a hollow win. In other words, you get it, but then you get there and go, oh gosh, there's still something missing.
Yeah.
Right? So if you have a second home, but maybe you don't have a good support network of friends, then maybe having the second home isn't important and having the support network is. Because if you don't have anybody to go there with, does it really matter that you have it?
Yeah, that's true, right? If you have spent most of your life in one area, and then you buy a second house 2-3 hours away or even further, you move there, great, you're in this beautiful area, but then maybe if you've got nobody to do things with or socialize with, it might become kind of lonely or not as fulfilling as you thought it might be.
Yeah. I mean, it's a huge, again, you're seeing consistent evidence out there that the isolation is a bigger and bigger problem. Especially if you think about a couple, excuse me, that started out in retirement and something happens to one of the partners.
Yeah.
Gosh, you just lost a partner there, and now you have to figure out where you go from there, right? So again, just unpacking and making sure there's a lot of people in the mix, a variety of people in the mix, right? Age variety, different backgrounds, different ways that they serve you. There was a piece in the Wall Street Journal earlier this year that was talking about how having basically different friends for different means.
Like different social networks, I guess.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Right? Maybe you have some hobby friends, you have some work friends, you have some friends if you have kids, you share that commonality, and they each serve a different role, right? You have friends you share more intimate topics with. If you're trying to figure something out about the house, maybe you have some people you go to about that.
That's right, yeah.
So, just the different roles that they can play and recognizing, again, the importance that they play in your life right now.
Yeah, I would say that's true for me. I definitely have some different friend groups. I'm a golfer, so I have some golf friends, and then couples friends and friends with kids. So, because we all go through different things in life, right? You can't have probably one friend group that's going to solve every or fit every area of interest that you have, maybe.
Correct. Yeah, and that recognition is helpful to realize that the intentionality of building that group, right? You want to be very intentional about who it is and make sure it's diverse, because if you built mainly a group of friends that centered around your job and then you retire and they're all still working, not an ideal scenario.
Yeah, that's definitely a common one. I feel like people go through a lot because, you've been working with people for a long time, and then now you retire and you've lost that connection. I mean, I have some friends and clients who've retired. They get together like once a month with some of their old work friends. They'll get together for breakfast or lunch or something like that so they can stay connected.
Very much so. Yeah, because you might have friendships that are 5, 10, 20, 30 years. Yeah. And you obviously had a lot in common. You run a common mission together. And if that just goes away, right, I think that's the challenge, Ryan, for some of these folks who are getting ready to retire is, are you aware of how it literally is like a switch?
Yeah.
Retire on a Friday.
Yeah, it's like a
Monday
breakup
morning.
almost,
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
And trying to prepare people in all the ways.
Sure.
Right? Just prepare them in all the ways.
On that vein, do you think, do you suggest to people like before they retire to maybe like assess, all right, where's my social network, or, and should I maybe look to build that up before I retire? Because if my whole social network is my work and then I'm no longer there, right?
Yes. Absolutely. So I think in the same way, I see a lot of, again, info and resources from the financial world about doing financial check-ins. And right, and you can do these at any point even, right? It doesn't have to be, 2 years out from retirement. There's not a certain time frame. I mean, you can be, 20 years out from retirement and just sort of start putting it in your mind as far as, well, gosh, what am I going to do? So the social one's a big one. I think looking at your mix of friends and what that looks like, assessing your health, right? Kind of back to my example for that gentleman that worked at Lowe's. I think that's a big part, is recognizing, how is your health? Are you genetically predisposed to certain conditions that you maybe need to take more active steps to avoid, right?
Sure.
What's your routine going to look like? Because if you don't have to get up and get out and do something, are you?
Yeah.
What does that look like? And again, back to what we talked about earlier, which is purpose and fulfillment. When you wake up in the morning and you're still laying on the pillow, what is it you're getting up for?
Yeah.
Right? What gets you out of bed? Is it being a grandparent? Is it travel? Is it volunteer work? Is it support of people in your neighborhood? They get to craft it, right? That's the part. I'm sure you have these conversations. These folks all get to craft their vision.
Yeah, that's important.
We just really want to illuminate what's out there for them that they should be crafting.
Yeah, everybody, I mean, we all need a purpose, right? I mean, I think if you don't have a purpose, it just, maybe life becomes not as fun, or you're kind of just float along maybe as well.
Yeah, you see that in movie lines, right? I mean, that can be a story arc where somebody just, their purpose goes away, or their known purpose maybe is the way to say it, right? They had a purpose at one point. You see it with empty nesters, right? If you had one of the parents who stayed home with the kids and was a caregiver for all those years, and now all of a sudden all the kids are gone, it's quite common for them to feel very lost. And why not? Their identity just went away. And so again, that recognition in advance of this big transition that's coming up, and then specifically, as we were talking before we got going, what resources exist, right? Just to educate folks on what resources exist and say, wow, I wish I knew that. So I wish I knew there was life coaching when I was getting out of college, because I think it could have helped shape my career earlier.
Yeah, that's definitely when a lot of people think back about their career counselor, right?
Yes.
And we used to take like a test, and then it would tell you what you're supposed to do in life.
Yes.
And a lot of people, got bad feedback from that test, because, one test can't really define what your whole purpose or, what your career is going to be.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it can change, it can evolve. And so I get plenty of parents who approach me as a coach and ask me to work with their adult children, because they can tell that they're languishing a bit. They're on a path maybe that was predetermined by others. That's not uncommon at all.
Sure.
Well, here's what I think I should do. Here's what I think others want me to do. And I think retirement fits that same bill, right? Where you see what other people do when they retire, and many people just fall on the, you mentioned golf earlier, right? Golf is always something that gets brought up.
Golf's a big one, right? If you didn't have the time for it, and now, you could play once a week. Now, great, I can play every day. Yeah. I find, like, from golfers I know, that gets kind of boring pretty quick, because, golf is one of these things where it's challenging, and you can level out pretty quickly as far as your ability and your score. So if you're doing the same thing over and over, you're kind of like, what's the point? Or not what's the point, but it's not as enjoyable. Or just the it's tiring to play golf. So playing 7 days in a row would tire most people out.
It's true. And so when hobbies become sort of the job, they don't always have the same feel, because it used to be an escape, and now it's more of a task. Absolutely right. And folks might feel like, people are really, just because they get to the point of retiring, their skill set, their minds are still sharp. And so they may want different ways to engage their minds. They might want to be part of something that has, more creativity to it, or a bigger purpose, for example, right? Volunteer work.
Sure.
Maybe they can come in and help mentor people. And so there's a lot of ways to really keep somebody engaged and active mentally, physically, and emotionally, I'm going to argue as well.
Yeah. Yeah, there's definitely a lot of things, a lot of nonprofits and different organizations that are looking for help, even part-time help. You read all about, like, different industries that have shortages of people. I was reading that the accounting industry is going through a shortage. I guess it's not very attractive to be an accountant, as a career path for young people for whatever reason. So, if you were an accountant, maybe you just work 10 hours a week or 15 hours a week, without all the stress of a full-time commitment, something like that.
That's right. And it also, right, so it's their own time frame, right? So the time freedom, which is important, and it also keeps them very engaged, and they may have been very passionate about it. And so it doesn't have to be a light switch where you go from full-time to zero.
Sure.
Right? There's different ways that make that transition smaller.
Yeah. So what are action steps that you would recommend, like, for people, that are, I guess, at what point would you recommend it, and what would you recommend they start doing to try to get in the right framework or mindset, I guess?
It is a mindset component. I think that's important, right? The first thing is to bubble it up to be a very conscious, as I said earlier, right? A lot of our thoughts are subconscious. So I'll retire at 65. Cool. I don't know why that's important, but that seems to be the number, right? And there is some logic to it.
That's the Medicare number,
Correct.
That, yeah.
Yeah. Right. That's the
It used to be Social Security, but at one point too, yeah.
Yes, exactly right.
Yeah.
Right. So we got these built-in definitions. So I say, first off, start thinking about it now.
Yeah.
I challenge for me, there was a bit of a reveal where initially I thought I would actually do a sort of traditional retirement, right? Where I get to that number and then I just stop and then I go do other things. And I thought, well, if I can maintain a schedule that I like, doing something that I enjoy while allowing for other things that I enjoy, well, then it's just one of the things that I do. It's not work in that sense.
Yeah.
Right? So I think even examining it earlier than people think, meaning in their 20s, 30s, and 40s, and just asking, what is retirement? What does this word mean? What does this stage represent? And what am I actually going for? I think that's a good place to start. And then I would start doing a self-assessment. What do you think the biggest challenges are? The other thing we can do, you probably use this when you have conversations, is look at other people that you admire as far as how they've retired, right? So almost like a mentor type of role, and say, wow, I really like the way that person retired, but what specifically do you like about it, right? What is it that you admire about the way they retired? And really start to peel that onion and say, okay, A, B, C, and D are the things I admire. Okay, now do a gut check. What's the importance of those to you?
Yeah.
Right. Because your value system.
That's a good one. I mean, I hadn't thought about that. I mean, as a business owner and financial advisor, there's other financial advisors I admire, right, for how they run their business and help people and such. But that's a good one. Admire people that are retired. Admire that person who retired at 50. That would be most people's ideal, right? Yeah. But it might not be possible for everyone. Yeah.
But the flip of that also is the people that I know who have retired early in the sense, right? So let's say under 60, they're still doing something.
Yeah.
They're still doing something. They just got out of the role that they were in for the first 25 or 30 years, but they're still doing something.
That's right, yeah.
Right? So it's almost a disservice to be like, well, they retired. Well, no, they actually just transitioned their career to something that gives them more time freedom.
Yeah.
And the freedom, again, of creativity, choice, maybe they got stuck in a role and they stuck around. I hear a lot of people who stick around for the pensions, right?
Yeah.
And so they stick around and, for a good financial reason, I can understand that benefit.
Sure.
But maybe that wasn't something they were all that passionate about.
Yeah.
And so now's the chance to fill
That's
that.
a balancing act, right? There's a trade-off for everything. More financial security for less time, or more time and less financial security, if we're referring to a pension,
Absolutely. And as long as it's, I tell folks when I coach people or just have a conversation about coaching, there's not a right or wrong decision. There's a decision that's going to be best suited for you based off of your needs and your values. And I just want those decisions to be really conscious, right?
Sure.
Well thought out, took the time to think it through and understand, okay, I'm going for this certain goal. Why? What is it going to do for me? Does it really matter, or have I attached? Because sometimes we are pursuing something that used to hold meaning, and that meaning has significantly diminished.
Sure.
Right? And so I think that's the part, is just sort of that reassessment, being open to the reassessment. And it can be scary. It can be really scary because sometimes you don't know what you're going to find.
Yeah.
And that can scare
people.
Yeah,
you're chasing something that you couldn't catch, and now you catch it, and you're like, now what do I do?
Yes.
So,
yes.
Yeah.
Big time.
Yeah. Is there any like online tools or questionnaires like people can fill out to try to get a better handle on some of this?
So I do provide, in what I do provide some self-assessments. One is retirement focused, and a lot of that deals with the emotions that we feel as human beings. Emotions drive the majority of our decision making. You know this. I'm preaching to the choir with you. And so just getting people to start recognizing the role those emotions play in some of the career choices that we make. So I do offer that. I don't know, there may be other tools out there separately from that, but I do offer that to advisors to use with their clients, because again, I know the work that you're doing. You're the primary professional that folks are working with as a financial advisor, as a wealth manager. And really what I seek to do, and what I hope to get more resources around, is essentially supporting your clients through you.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's just not my, expertise, and sometimes I really don't have the time for it either, to be, meeting with people on a regular basis about this type of thing. So it's important that they have these resources. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's an important acknowledgement, what you just said, and I try to convey, which is, and there are retirement coaches, again, there are life coaches, because it doesn't have to be, even if you're retiring, other things may come up that just coincide with retirement. It may not be specific to retirement, but just knowing when to bring in another professional, because there's more there. Right? Yeah. We know there's different levels. So there's tax professionals, there's legal professionals, and really I seek to just raise the retirement support professionals. They can be life coaches, but they're not limited to that. And just say, okay, this person wants to explore more. Let me help educate and pass them along to somebody who can help them.
Yeah, makes sense. So if people want to reach out to you, what's the best way to do that?
So they can go to coach360.io, coach360.io.
Okay. All right.
There are some resources on the website that they'll be able to access at no cost. Some general information about, you'll see from people, I think one of the neat parts about retiring is many people have retired before, and they can tell us, here's some things to be aware of, right? I mean, most of my knowledge of this comes from people who have retired, right? And having those conversations or reading articles or listening to podcasts. So there's information on there about some of the challenges that may come up, things to be aware of in advance. And even if you're into retirement, there's no better time than right now to start taking control of, again, where you are versus where you want to be, and how can we get you there. So coach360.io. You can connect with me directly. Again, there's some further info about retirement resources, and ways they can help themselves.
Okay, awesome. Thank you very much, Craig. Thanks for coming on this week.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
And for everybody listening, have a great week. And as always, if you have a question, feel free to go to retirewithryan.com to propose your question, or if you want to suggest a guest for a future episode. Take care.